How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here with your 2024 NDC schedule.
We'll be at as many NDC conferences as possible this year, and you should consider attending no matter what. The Copenhagen Developers Festival happens August 26th through the 30th. Tickets at cphdevfest.com.
NDC Porto is happening October 14th through the 18th. Tickets at ndcporto.com.
We'll see you there. We hope. Welcome back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
And we're here with Mark Rendle. We're going to introduce him in a minute. But first, I want to check in with my buddy Richard. You ready for Dev Intersection?
Well, when this show publishes, we will be most of the way through the show. I think we'll be close to doing like the closing session and stuff as we usually do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, we got our act together. Got a new version of a generative AI show, which has been an adventure to put together. Boy, oh boy, there are a lot of AI conferences right now.
Yeah, I know.
It's right. A little nuts.
But still Dev Intersection with all your favorite Microsoft people and speakers.
The Hanselmans and the Hunters and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so. The Scotts.
Yeah.
The Major Scott and the Lesser Scotts.
They're all VPs now. I mean, there's one Guthrie, but he's not there. But, he's on sabbatical. What's up with that?
Yeah, what is up with that?
Yeah.
What does Scott Guthrie do on sabbatical? Does he read tech manuals? Does he create a few more patents?
No, he's got teenage boys. I think he's got other things to worry about.
So. Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, let's jump into Better Know a Framework. Roll the crazy music.
Awesome. All right, man. What do you got?
So this was our clickbait story on security this week.
Yep. But it's not clickbait if it's true.
Yeah, I know, but that's what we call them. We call
it.
The last story is always the one people want to hear about the most, so we let them slog through all the other stories and then we spring it on them. So here it is. You're not going to believe this. Researchers find SQL injection to bypass airport TSA security checks.
Nice.
So what this means is there is a vulnerability where somebody could use SQL injection when they bought a ticket, and that ticket could give them status as crew.
Right.
And then they could walk right on it through, go right up into the, the bulkhead seats or whatever, sit down and enjoy all of the crew amenities.
Not that there's that many crew amenities, but yeah, you're definitely going to have access to more seats.
Yeah.
The bigger one here is that you can go to the crew line at the TSA.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a very cursory view.
And you don't have to be dressed as crew. I mean, you don't have to be working on that flight.
Right.
But if you are crew, you get a special pass and you get all sorts of amenities. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
They normally check ID. So I wonder if you actually try to do that. When you got to the line, they're like, where's your ID?
Now that's just, raining on my parade here, Richard.
I still love that SQL injection attacks. Yeah,
SQL injection. Who knew? I thought we were done with this.
No. Still like it's number 1 or number 2 in the OWASP 10.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Still.
It was like 16 years ago we learned about this. Yeah.
No, it's been decades, and it's just sanitize your inputs. Bobby Tables is out there.
Bobby Tables. You got to watch out for him. All right. That's what I got. Who's talking to us today, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1888, the one we did with Steve Smith talking about modular monoliths. And I know we're going to talk about simplicity with Mark. So I thought this conversation just tied in so well with that whole problem space, because that's the show that Smith did, focused on, simplifying a monolith, tearing out pieces to optimize them, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's that whole idea that you don't have to go totally microservices. You can just do what you need to do. And Mark had this comment. He said, there's a different Mark not our guest, Garth. He said, from an application level, I agree with Steve's point of view that to start with a monolith and then split off whatever needs to be spun into its own services as the need arises. From a hosting point of view, though, the reality is most businesses, unfortunately, when you start down one technical direction, regardless of what it is, you're likely to keep going down that forever because temporary solutions become permanent.
Yep.
For example, moving from something like app service to Kubernetes is a huge jump, and it'll be hard to get business buy-in for what the need arises from it.
Yeah.
And I found you can use something like Kubernetes as a service from the onset, but with very minimal setup thanks to managed services like Azure Kubernetes Services, which gives you the flexibility to build resilience and scalability and everything else as the need arises without having to overhaul the entire system architecture. And I appreciate the thinking, Mark, because my workaround would be to stay in app service, but then to spin off the problem service as a logic app, right? That just, make it a serverless component. It just gets called the same and you can keep it in the security context. But I'm not going to argue with you about moving from app service to Kubernetes. That's a huge lift, but that's the all microservices mantra is to do that huge lift. And I don't think people want to do it. So the fact that we can spin off bits into serverless components and deal with their performance issues or their behavior issues separately is the simple workaround rather than looking at the big wall of climbing up Kubernetes.
Yeah, that's why we have modular monoliths. So we can break off the pieces that need broken off.
Right. And you could break them off in less painful ways.
Yeah.
I mean, you could even spin it up as a separate app service, but I wouldn't.
Nope, I wouldn't either.
So, Mark, thank you so much for your comment. And a copy of Music Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music Code By.
And you can follow us on X Twitter if you want. That's we've been there for years, but the cool kids are hanging out at Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at Tech Hub Social.
And I'm Rich Campbell at mastodon.social.
Send us a toot. It's another way that you can get a copy of Music to Code By.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's bring back Rendle, Mark Rendle. He is one of our favorite guests. He's the founder of Rendle Labs, which provides consulting services and workshops to .NET development teams across all industries. His particular obsessions are API design and development, performance, observability, and code-based modernization. He also uses skills acquired during a few years as a professional stand-up comic to deliver entertaining and informative talks at conferences around the world, and recently learned to play bass so he could join tech parody band The Line Breakers. Hey, dude.
Hey, man.
Congratulations. Welcome to the world of music for no money.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am loving it. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
You did the parody band thing for a while there, Carl, but did you actually get into trouble with that? Was that back before parody was like accepted use?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, here's the story. So Don Box and Ted Pattison and George Bullock and a couple other people started this band called Band on the Runtime. And Band on the Runtime was parodies of C# to well-known music, right? So 50 Ways to Send a Message, that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the Microsoft lawyers had a problem with it because parody law says you can parody a song by, changing the words like Weird Al does, like, because I'm fat, ham on, whole wheat, right? But you can't parody something like C# using a song. That's not covered by parody law. So you can't change the words to parody something else. We weren't actually poking fun at the songs. We were using the songs to poke fun at .NET. And the lawyers kind of put the kibosh.
This seems very sus.
Well, but the law is the law. So they basically went to Paul Simon, for example, and they said, how much would it cost for the band to play, this at a, Microsoft event? And he wanted like $250,000. So that's the law.
Yeah.
You have to get permission.
The law is subject to interpretation. I think those lawyers interpreted it very oddly.
Yeah.
Microsoft lawyers interpret things as badly as possible, don't they?
But, they are Microsoft. And if it was just me doing it, who cares? Because go ahead. I don't have $250,000,
Yeah.
But Microsoft,
Yeah, might be a problem.
Yeah.
And, all we are doing, we provide the entertainment at conference parties, and it's like there's a couple hundred people there and they're all drunk, and
Yeah.
we don't parody any specific. The closest we have to parodying a specific technology, I think, is JavaScript, which was one of the
a parody
first
unto
songs.
itself.
And JavaScript isn't even a language; it's a standard, I suppose. I was going to say something meaner, but I won't. But no, Linebreakers, their bassist used to be Don Syme.
Right.
The creator of F#. And then he got pulled into GitHub Next, the kind of Microsoft Research equivalent at GitHub. But he was still at Microsoft Research and still sort of the benevolent dictator for life of F#, and he just could not fit in conferences as well as all of that. And so then they were without bassist, and then I said to Dylan Beattie, how hard is bass? Because he's only got 4 strings.
I mean, how hard can it be?
And he went, it's actually not, it's much, much easier than guitar. And so he lent me one, and I took it home and I plugged it into my computer with a sort of 6.5 to USB cable, and got Rocksmith Plus and tried playing a few things. And I think within 5 minutes of sitting down, I had learned to play 7 Nation Army.
Okay.
And so it's not an easy instrument. And if there are any bassists out there going, oh no, not this again, it is definitely not an easy instrument. I've gotten to like jazz and funk and disco and those sorts of things. But the learning curve is extremely shallow at first. So it's very, very encouraging.
Yeah, right. You can play Smoke on the Water just by going bup, 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 bup,
totally.
bup, 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 bup. Right.
Chugging bass lines.
However,
I love them.
Bass, it's easier because you don't have chords and all of that. But it is more difficult because to play bass really well, you have to have a great tone, by the way.
Yes.
And also you have to have soul. Like bass player, just to be able to play a couple of notes isn't playing bass. You really have to. It takes a while before the funk or the soul comes out.
Yeah, and just getting in the pocket, like right on the beat,
right,
and just giving tone to the drums. But
at least you don't have chords.
But I don't have chords.
That's your Jaco Pastorius.
And
I was thinking
nobody is Jaco.
Yeah, Kenny Lee.
There are a few very extraordinary bassists, but not essential.
So what's on your mind, Rendle?
What have you been up to?
I was at the Copenhagen Developer Festival last week. Rich was there, and it was absolutely brilliant. And I had a new Locknote talk that I did, which is called the Albatross Project. But they also asked me to do the free meetup the Tuesday night before the festival started. And I had a talk that I'd submitted for Copenhagen that they rejected because I just do lock notes for NDC now, apparently. But they said, you can do that talk at the meetup if you want. And the talk was called How Simple is as Simple as Possible. And this is both of these talks, they're related. So the talk is a sort of technical, can you do this? Can you do that? How can you keep things simple? And then the Albatross project is the opposite of the Phoenix project.
Nice.
And it's about a development director who doesn't deliver anything for 35 years because he keeps trying to stay on the cutting edge. And and I just, after I did the talk version of it, at which there was one slide where the slide popped up on the screen and somebody immediately got up and walked out.
So you knew it was the right slide.
So I'm kind of like, yeah, this is working.
You don't think like his wife was in labor or, his family emergency?
Probably a React developer. or Angular or Vue, because those were there were 3 JavaScript framework logos on the slide.
Did you say anything where you're like, hey, where are you going?
I hadn't said anything because we were actually having a technical issue at the time. Okay. And so I mean, it is possible it was the technical issue that sent him out. They was kind of like, I'm not waiting around while these people turn the screen back on or whatever. But yes, it's I feel like I owe people an apology to a certain extent because in my 40s, I did a lot of bouncing around the world telling people how to containerize things and do microservices and event-driven things and Kubernetes and all that sort of stuff. And Now in my 50s, I'm kind of wishing most people would stop. And so that's my mission at the moment. And I'm going to be trying to get this talk into as many things as possible next year and start pushing at it. Because we've just made everything just so complicated.
Yeah.
In the name of efficiency, in the name of standardization.
Potential future scalability. That's the big one.
Yes, absolutely. But also you hear the term DX, developer experience.
Right.
And developer experience, I feel like that should be an important thing in terms of your IDE, your code editor, your command line tooling, that sort of thing. But if you're getting to a point where the improved developer experience that you get from sort of CI/CD and microservice deployments and rollouts and all that sort of thing is actually getting in the way of delivering a good user experience because of the increased latencies that you get or the 15 megabytes of JavaScript that a web page has to download before it becomes interactive, then there's something wrong with that. We have our priorities completely the wrong way round.
Yeah, one of the ways to keep that stuff fast is to keep it simple.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
It's been my mantra, do the simplest thing that works. Ever since I got started in software, that's been, stapled to my forehead.
Yeah. I wish I could say the same of myself, but at least, I'm realizing it now and attempting to share some of that.
Well, I think part of this is we wanted to believe that if we, embedded ourselves in this architecture, like if we understood all the pieces, that gradually software would be easier in that space. I just don't feel like it ever got there.
No. I mean, I think it did at a particular point. I think ASP.NET MVC
pretty simple.
Was relatively simple. And the idea of the pipeline, so what we kind of kicked off with OWin, based on things like Python WSGI and Ruby's rack middleware. And then OWin obviously kind of got rolled into ASP.NET Core.
Right.
And that was nice and simple. It was like, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. But then I think the problem is that as developers, we think that if we're not changing the way we do things, if we're not evolving, then we are failing in some way. There's this whole thing about continuous learning.
Right.
And so people kind of go, well, somebody says microservices, so I need to learn microservices. Now I know microservices. Why have I learned it if I'm not going to use it? And then they end up breaking something with like 24 endpoints down into 12 microservices. Right. And you're just like, no, stop.
You should have learned that from Dr. Cod, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I always like the argument that microservice makes a lot of sense when the team is huge, that it creates a level of granularity that you can have a lot of people working in parallel and then have your fights over integration rather than fights over coding.
Yeah.
But most teams aren't that big.
No, they're really not. But I think a lot of the time people who don't necessarily have a lot of different job experiences within the industry, they think that they're in a big department because there's like 120 developers.
Right.
And then you're kind of like, no. Go and look at Netflix or Uber or Microsoft or your average financial institution. I worked at Morgan Stanley, and I think I was one of 10,000 developers working at Morgan Stanley. So yeah, that. And the other thing then is when you're at that scale and your team within that may be a lot larger and have a lot more different people on it. You may have a sort of architect leading the design of the system, and you have testers and DevOps people and all those kinds of things. And so what they call a microservice can well be bigger than the entire thing that other people are trying to break down into microservices. And so, yeah, there's this dissonance from people not actually realizing what scale they're at because it feels big to them.
They just haven't been exposed to the other things. What about the cloud native concept? Like, is this, where do you fall on that?
We should define it first.
Yes. So cloud native is essentially building apps that are designed to run in the cloud and leverage. I think, like the term 12-factor apps has kind of fallen out of use a lot. I think Heroku introduced that idea. And I think Heroku was one of the first cloud native style platforms way before Kubernetes and containers and all that sort of thing came along. And it was build your app so that it consumes services that are provided for you.
Right.
And can be deployed by doing a Git push or whatever else. And you're not worried about infrastructure. You're not worried about VM size, CPU, core count, all those sorts of things, because you're just
no updating machines, just building new instances and rolling across. Like.
Totally. And then you have things as on top of that, around reliability, which obviously, Poly, in .NET, but when you're building for the cloud, you have to build for partition. You have to build for things that are likely to, things in the cloud go down for 2 seconds and then come back up again.
Right.
Because somebody did a push and it just happened. And so you have to have retrays.
That.
You can't just go, oh no, the database is gone. You have to go, well, I'll try again in a second, then in 2 seconds, then in 4 seconds, obviously with that weird fuzzing thing that changes those numbers into something not quite so round.
Yeah. But maybe that's what's happened is people misconstrue being cloud native with products like Kubernetes.
That's the thing. So you have cloud native, which is a concept and an idea and an abstract that you can aim for. And then you have the cloud native computing foundation, which is attempting to be for cloud computing what the Linux Foundation is for Linux.
Yeah.
And, Kubernetes is often called the operating system of the cloud. And there's going to be people going, often called by whom? But so they have projects that go through kind of incubator and preview and then stable and ready for everybody to use. And so people feel like if they are going to be cloud native, then they should go down that like it's a checklist almost and go, are we running on Kubernetes? Are we using a service mesh? Are we using a document database? Are we using event sourcing and all these things that they have projects for?
Yeah.
And you can be cloud native. You could build, please don't, but you could build an ASP.NET web forms app that was cloud native, that covered all those things just with the various rules and all this sort of stuff. There's nothing stopping you from pushing an ASP.NET web forms app into an Azure app service
in a VM or something,
or a VM, or you can.
And that just proves the point that just because you have checked off all the boxes doesn't mean you're using the right technology for the job.
Well,
absolutely.
And you haven't talked about the customer requirements anywhere along the path here.
No, nobody's asking about that. The customer's kind of going, what I would really like is for the page to load in less than 400 milliseconds.
Yeah.
And which is the something limit. It's like 400 milliseconds is the point at which people go, that was
perceptibility limits.
And we've actually got to this point now. This is one of the conversations I was having with people where 400 milliseconds feels unattainable.
Yeah.
And have you guys watched the Spotify documentary thing on Netflix? Playlist or something it's called? So it's about the guy who started Spotify. It's like 6 episodes and they're each done from a different perspective, a different person's point of view. But Daniel Ek, the guy who started Spotify, his sole focus to get it launched in tech terms was that when you click the play button on a song, it should start playing like immediately. And he was aiming for that 400 millisecond point, and he got it. And that was in 2001. And now we're here with an internet that is several orders of magnitude faster. We've got 5G on our phones. We've got gigabit plus internet at affordable prices for a lot of people. And we're still saying, that's really tricky. We can do it in like 1.4 seconds if you're on a fast connection. And yeah, we've lost sight of the ball. And we need to examine ourselves as an industry and say, well, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And is there any...
What are we doing for those 1.4 seconds exactly?
Yeah, what are you up to? And so, yeah, and like I say, the talk covers this from infrastructure, from back end, from front end, from programming language and all these different things. And yeah, front end, it is honestly quite a simple answer. We are downloading a shed load of JavaScript,
right,
which the browser then has to pass and JIT and do all those sorts of things. And before we do all of that, people can't scroll our blog. And you're like, it's a blog. The only thing on it that needs to be interactive is the comments and maybe a like button or a share button. Even the share buttons are just links. But no, I see people sort of writing blogs with nux.js.
Are you still bullish on Blazor Server, Mark?
I really like Blazor Server for internal things, for where you have a very definite upper limit on the number of concurrent connections that you can have. And it's like in the thousands, or maybe tens of thousands, and you can scale up for that and everything. Once you scale Blazor Server beyond a single instance, then obviously it becomes trickier. So if you've got like messages and one person sends it on one instance, that now has to bounce through something like a Redis pub sub or something so that the other instances can pick it up. But it's still very simple. Actually, I've been playing with so Blazor in .NET 8, and you have the server-side rendering.
Yep.
And so it will render pages on the server and it will return them. So you can have a site that works with search engines,
just like
as much as anything
Razor
else, just like
pages.
classic Razor pages. And then it will download the Blazor WebAssembly runtime in the background, and it will download your natively compiled Blazor application in the background, and then silently, without the user even noticing that anything has happened, the next time they navigate, it won't make a request to the server. It will do it locally. It's like magic,
except that it doesn't work.
They'll get there.
Yeah. I've done tests, and I recently did another one, and we go from server-side render directly to WebAssembly. There isn't any server rendering in between while WebAssembly is downloading, and that's been a problem ever since they released .NET 8, and it's still a problem.
Well,
but they'll get there.
I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed for .NET 9, but no, I did.
Yeah, hasn't shipped yet.
I ran into some issues with it myself, and I've started looking at an alternative thing, which is HTMX. What
does that X stand for?
So essentially, this is a pushback against things like React and Angular and so forth, where it's kind of what you actually want to do. What you actually want to achieve is when the user clicks something or interacts with something in some way, you want to make a call to a server, and then you want to make a change to the DOM of your current page.
Right.
And insert a div and with some stuff in it or something.
Right.
And so
which is how Blazor Server works.
Which is how Blazor Server works.
Yeah.
And HTMX is kind of let's just lean into that as far as possible, and we'll just use HTML attributes on elements, and we'll say, okay, so on this element, when the user clicks, we are going to make a request to this endpoint on our server, which is going to return a fragment of HTML, and then we're going to insert that HTML into the page at this point, or we're going to replace an existing element with that HTML. And for, I think, like 90% of use cases, that actually covers most of the things you want to do. It will do like your comment form at the bottom of your blog. It will do your like buttons and an updated view of how many likes you've got and all those sorts of things, but without a huge JavaScript runtime doing shadow DOM things and observing signals. They seem to be going on about signals over in JavaScript land at the moment. That's very exciting for them, and yay.
So that's sort of like the evolution of Ajax, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's kind of,
without the plumbing.
I feel like it's a shame we had to go all the way around SPA to get back to the point where we're going, here's a really sensible evolution of Ajax.
Just refill a div tag for me, would you please?
Yeah.
Right.
So I built a site when I was learning the base, and it's called Fret Badger, which is partly because I like, it's not a mollusk.
Okay.
If I ever start another company, it's just going to be called Not a Mollusk Limited. Yes. What do you do? It's unclear, but it's definitely not a mollusk. So yeah, you can hijack the domain for me and then just blackmail me. But no, so Fret Badger, I wanted to learn the fretboard, and I wanted to learn scales and modes for jazz and arpeggios and that sort of thing. And so
I see the chart behind you.
Yes, exactly. I've got the bass chart on the wall, which has got all the modes and everything else. And it's basically just, if you want to play up this scale, and you've got the major scale, the minor scale, pentatonics, blues, all these different things. And my bass teacher was pushing me to learn music theory. And I got really into it because it's maths.
It's maths.
And it's so cool. Yeah.
It's rules and it's logical.
Yep.
And so I thought, well, the best way.
This is one of the many reasons that musicians and developers go so well together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought, so if I can encode all this information about music theory into C# and some data structures, then that would be a good way to learn it. And also it would be a fun site to build.
Neat.
And so it's just an ASP.NET Core MVC app at the moment, but it does have this thing. So you can have you choose your fretboard and you say, okay, so I want the bass, standard bass fretboard, standard tuning, and I want the C major scale, and it'll show you the little dots to show you where to put your fingers. But then when I was doing jazz, it would be really good if I could have 4 or 5 of them on the screen at once. And so I added in a thing, but every time you add a new fretboard, it reloads the entire page and then it scrolled back to the top. And so I was looking for a way to make it kind of more smoothly interactive. And so that's what I was looking at the Blazor server side plus WASM for. But as Carl says, there are some issues. But then I saw HTMX and I'm kind of like, that is exactly what I want. And the beautiful thing is it works really, really well with ASP.NET Core because we have partials. Right. And so we can just go, when this request comes in, just render this partial. So yeah, it's that sort of thing. The key thing with HTMX though is the entire library is 14.6 kilobytes, minified and gzipped, which is tiny.
That's less than your logo graphic.
Sorry, I had button radius is bigger than that.
Yeah. It's like that thing where when Windows 7 came out, the desktop wallpaper took up more disk space than the whole of Windows 3.1. And you're like, and what is it doing?
Just background.
So yeah, it's that. And they provide documentation and guidance on how to use Alpine.js, which is again a very lightweight JavaScript framework, kind of like a miniature alternative to jQuery for the things that jQuery did that didn't then get built into JavaScript 2015 or 2016 or whatever. So if you do need, I have one thing where I wrote custom JavaScript, which is once you've got your C major scale up on the fretboard, if you click one of the Cs, it will fade the others that aren't part of that arpeggio. And so it's kind of like going, so you do this, and then that's your second and your third and your fourth, and so on. And that's 20 lines of JavaScript,
Wow.
which isn't even worth minifying at that point.
Yeah.
I think it's actually still hard coded into the layout.cs HTML. And so, yeah, just that, little bits of JavaScript here and there to do a couple of things in the browser, and then HTMX for everything else. And it's working really well. I'm going to be pushing it live soon.
That's great. And before we take a break, I just want to mention that I had written, 4 or 5 years ago, this tool. I have a guitar that has a Roland GK pickup, GK3 pickup, which is a split pickup. So it goes right in between the bridge and your first pickup of the guitar. And it has 6 individual pickups for each string, and those go through a Roland processor. And then you can process each string individually. So another thing it can do is map it to MIDI. So what I have is something that pulls up the MIDI from your guitar and figures out where your fingers are on the fretboard and shows it to you on the screen. Not only that, but then I put like a service between it. So somebody could log in Texas and I'm playing in my place and I can be teaching them. And as I play, the dots show up where my fingers are. Not only that, I got to chord charts and chord names based on the music theory of it. So
Nice.
If you're interested in that code base, I'll gladly send it to you.
I would love to see that. Yeah, that sounds amazing. So yeah, and I feel compelled to ask, did you write that using event sourcing or DDD?
No.
How many
Nope.
Kubernetes clusters are you running on?
It was very simple. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more with Mark Rendle. Stay tuned. Did you know that you can work with AWS directly from your IDE? AWS provides toolkits for Visual Studio Code, and JetBrains Rider. Learn more at aws.amazon.com/net/tools. You know, it's common for a business application to contain 15% repetitive code just because of metaprogramming limitations in the C# language. Why write boilerplate manually when a machine could generate it for you? Enter Metalama, the code generation and verification toolkit for C#. Their C# to C# template language is simply amazing. Logging, caching, memento, observable. If it's repetitive, Metalama can automate it. Visit metalama.net today and learn to automate your code patterns with their free edition. Remember, it's Metalama with one L. metalama.net. Attention .NET developers. Looking for the ultimate SDK to handle electronic document processing? Meet TX Text Control. TX Text Control is your go-to solution for seamless PDF generation, secure electronic signatures, and efficient digital forms processing, all within your .NET applications. Empower your products with robust document management capabilities, boost productivity, and deliver top-notch solutions to your clients. Trusted by developers worldwide, including me and Richard, TX Text Control is the SDK that makes a difference. Check out demos.textcontrol.com for live online demos and see it in action. And we're back. I'm Carl Franklin. That's my friend Richard Campbell.
Hey.
And Mark Rendle's here, and we're talking about simplicity. And by the way, I need to remind you that if you don't want to hear the ads, you can become a $5 a month patron of .NET Rocks and get an ad-free feed. Go to patreon.netrocks.com. Okay, so I guess you were talking about HTMX and...
So yeah, and HTMX is one example of
simplification.
People actually, I'm starting to see projects popping up that are pushing back against this complexity that we've created. And there are other examples as well. There are, you don't need to run a Kubernetes. So, the comment that you read at the start of the show from the other Mark, and he was saying how AKS and EKS, the sort of managed Kubernetes,
right,
are super easy to run. They're really not. They're easier.
They're easier. It's only because you've been traumatized by trying to run Kubernetes by hand.
I mean, yeah, just never, ever, ever try to run your own Kubernetes cluster unless maybe you just want to build one with 5 Raspberry Pis just for giggles. But But no, so let's take Azure as an example, just because it's the one that I know best. But Microsoft support a version of Kubernetes, I think, for 4 minor versions. So I think we're on like 1.21 at the moment. I get confused with version numbers. And so they'll still be supporting 20 and 19 and 18. But as soon as 22 comes along, if you're still on 18, you need to upgrade.
Right.
And Kubernetes versions land 3 monthly or 6 monthly. I'm not sure.
So that means every year then you're probably upgrading.
So, but you are at least once a year going to have to upgrade your Kubernetes cluster.
Right.
And if you do the upgrade the minimum number of times possible, then you're doing Kubernetes versioning is a whole thing anyway, because those are not minor versions. They are major versions. A lot of the time they remove APIs, they deprecate APIs, and yet somehow we're still on 1 point something. And so if you want to minimize the number of times you have to do this, you're going to be going from like 1.18 to 1.22. That's a lot of jump. That's a lot of things that in a enterprise environment, you're going to have people going over pages and pages and pages of release notes to make sure that you're not going to break anything. Or you upgrade every time the new version becomes available, which is going to take less time per upgrade, but potentially more time overall. And then it's not enough to just be running in Kubernetes. You have to have your service mesh. You have to have your sidecars. You have to have your sort of various load balancers and all these kinds of things. And nobody's managing that for you. Microsoft hasn't blessed a service mesh because they can't, because people want different things. So it's simpler, but it is by no means simple. And then you look at, you type container into the create a new thing in the Azure portal. And actually the first thing that pops up is container app. And that is simple. So that is write your Docker file, or, in my case, right click in the Solution Explorer in JetBrains Rider and say add Docker file, and it just generates it for you with all the right, best practices. And then do Docker build, and then do Docker push to your Azure container registry, and then just deploy the thing. And underneath it all, it's running on a massive Kubernetes cluster that Microsoft...
But you don't have to own.
Yes, Microsoft are taking care of everything. They're taking care of the service mesh, the upgrade cycle, the stability and resilience and all those sorts of things.
Well, and arguably, if you decide it isn't running well in container apps and want to move to your own managed infrastructure, you're already there.
Exactly. Yeah. And equally now you can take a container and you can push that to Azure App Service, where you used to push web things to, which is also very nice and much easier than saying copy locally and all these various things. So yeah, on that side, there's that simplicity. And again, it's taken us a long time to get there. And
this is Microsoft figuring out what people actually are willing to use, right?
Yeah. And the reason you don't get straight from A to Z is because you can't see Z until you've gone through B, C, D, E, F and everything else.
Yeah.
And you don't know what it looks like. And it's very difficult to find out that something's a bad idea without trying it.
Yeah. And without, you always have the few folks that get it, that they're willing to put the time in, their customer is tolerant of it, and they can do this complexity. But then a whole bunch of others just like, nope, not doing it. And then that in the end, they have to, Microsoft looks and goes, well, we're just not getting enough adoption here. What if we did this? Like, they are just kind of hurling it at the wall bit by bit. And eventually they stumble onto these approaches that are simple enough.
Yeah. And, the big thing has been serverless, and still is serverless for a lot of the talks I'm seeing and that sort of thing.
Which is containers under the hood.
It's containers under the hood, but again, I'm going to talk about Azure Functions, but it equally applies to AWS Lambda and other serverless platforms. What you end up with then is vendor lock-in, because your triggers, you've got like blob storage triggers and Azure Queue triggers and service bus triggers and event hub triggers and all these different things. And so you're locking yourself into that. But with Azure Container Apps, you can use Dapper, which is an abstraction over. So you go, I need a cache, or I need a pub sub, and then that could be Redis, it could be Azure Service Bus, it could be Memcached or Varnish, whatever the different things are, Fusion Cache. And in your container description, you just go, this needs a cache, give it a cache. And then you use the Dapper API, which will run just as well. You can use Dapper with containers running in Amazon's container service and Google's container. DAPR, yes. DAPR. Naming, definitely an issue at first. And Microsoft.
Well, plus there is the other product called Dapper, DAPPER, right?
Which is a wrapper around ADO.NET.
Yeah, the kind of incredibly lightweight mapping from data readers to C# objects.
And I have nothing bad to say about either one, but they've got nothing to do with each other except when you say their names.
Yeah, entirely unrelated. But yeah, DAPR stands for Distributed Application Platform something. But Dapper's great, and it's I think Dapper I would put that in my simple column. It's kind of, I need a cache. I need a way that I can say, cache this data, now give it back.
Right.
And I shouldn't have to care about whether that's Redis or another solution or just memory. I should be able to say, cache it, give it back, and then worry about how that actually happens at deployment time.
Very good.
And again, you can use Dapper in Kubernetes, but you don't have to. You can use Dapper in other environments as well. And I just want to push people in that direction.
Well, and what I appreciate this is that you're still giving us access to all of this complexity without making it complicated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you're not saying no containers. You're saying containers that don't make you want to stab yourself.
I mean, containers are absolutely the simplest way of deploying an application.
Sure.
You need a Linux dependency like zip or something like that.
Just don't make me edit the YAML.
apt get in the Docker file and you've got it.
Yeah.
It's that original thing. If it works on my machine, I'm going to ship my machine.
Yeah.
And so, containers, I think, are the simplest unit of deployment we've come up with yet. And it's just a matter of where do you run them and do you need to run your Kubernetes cluster?
Yeah. And we're not complaining about containers. We're complaining about the orchestrators.
Totally. Yeah.
The management of containers.
And the assumption that because sort of Facebook and Netflix and Uber are using something, that it's the right solution for your company.
Right. You're not them.
You're not them. And they have armies of engineers whose only job is to maintain that infrastructure.
Right. Yeah. And test new versions and roll them out and all of that sort of stuff. And that's awesome if you need it. But if you don't, at the same time, you don't want to cut yourself off from the possibility that you might become one of these things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but if everything's just Docker files and containers, and at some point you go, actually, you know what, it'd be a lot cheaper. When you get to the point where you're spending so much on Azure container apps that you could not only run your own Kubernetes cluster, but employ somebody full time to keep an eye on it and do the upgrades and everything, then that's the point at which you switch.
Certainly on the run as side of things, for me, I'm having conversations with folks who are like, no, we repatriated this because we already run a 24/7 NOC and we were committed to doing these things. And this workload, now that we truly understood the shape of it, in the cloud, made more sense running at home.
Yeah, yes.
But that's a big lift, right? Like, it's not a small thing.
It is, really. And the same thing goes, I mean, I was complaining about people downloading 15 megabytes of JavaScript or WASM or whatever to run something in the browser. There are legitimate use cases for that. Adobe now have
inside the network
Photoshop and Lightroom as WASM compiled browser apps.
Right.
And if you want to edit photos and clean up red eye using AI algorithms and you want to do it in your browser, then you need to download all that WASM and that sort of thing, because you can't have somebody doing a round trip every time they make a change with a multi-megabyte image file, uncompressed.
Arguably, you're still talking about the simplest case. In this case, the simplest case is stick the whole thing in a WASM file and suffer the download overhead.
It's that as simple as possible, and thinking about what that means for you, for this project that you're working on today.
Yeah. It feels like you're just pressing against the defaults, that we're choosing complexity we don't need.
Yes. Yeah. And I think and it's not, I'm absolutely not blaming developers in isolation for this, because I think that the IT department, there are CTOs out there, there are CIOs, and they're going to their own conferences and being sold this stuff by people with very, very effective marketing machines. And then they come back and go,
And motivation's not involving keeping things simple.
Yeah. And they come back and they go, we have to adopt this because it's the next big thing. And not doing proper kind of cost benefit analysis and those things to work out whether it actually is the right thing.
Something just occurred to me about Blazor Server. I remember having customers say they didn't like Blazor Server because if the connection goes down, like they get that, what I call the transparent veil of death.
Oh, yeah.
You have the screens of death. This is a transparent veil. So it turns slightly transparent.
Or translucent.
Translucent. And, you have to press the reload button. So apparently in .NET 9, that is becoming much less frequent. Like the whole automatic reconnection thing is just going to happen.
And I believe that they can make that acceptable to everybody, certainly to the real tech guys. So instead of it going slightly transparent, don't change the UI at all.
Right.
Just leave, but it's frozen and it doesn't update, and then just change the cursor to a spinning beach ball and everybody will be happy.
Everybody will know what's happening.
Yeah. They'll go, it's like
disable
iTunes.
the UI and spinning beach ball, and then when it comes back, you're fine.
Why did they need to build a new view of that? It's stick with the thing we trust.
You can be very subtle.
The thing that also indicates that possibly we will recover. Like the veil doesn't give you a sense you're going to recover.
Nope. The veil's like, call tech support.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
That's it. It's gone. It's all gone wrong.
We have pulled the sheet over the body.
It broke.
But it makes sense in a context where you do have to hit Control R or F5 or whatever to refresh the page to get it to reload. But once they've got that reconnect and heal process working properly and smoothly, then.
So anyway, I haven't checked it out in .NET 9, but I hear that it's a major feature upgrade of Blazor. There aren't very many, though.
But fewer veils is a good one.
Fewer veils.
Yeah. That'll make people happier without a doubt.
Yeah.
The other thing that I talk about at the end of the talk is process. How we went from kind of SSADM and Prince 2 and all the waterfall things. And then there was extreme programming, but extreme programming generally only works when you've got Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham and
extreme programmers
and some of the greatest programmers who've ever lived all in a room together going, how are we going to build this?
Right.
So you can't do that on your average team of developers hired off of LinkedIn. And so then we got Agile, which was trying to make it so that we could, where you get a Scrum Master and a product owner. And I've worked on multiple teams that called themselves Agile and said they were doing Scrum that didn't have a Scrum Master, had a Scrum Master who was just a project manager anyway and wasn't really doing the Scrum Mastery things. And in an awful lot of cases, no product owner at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Agile-ish.
Agile-ish. Scrum but.
Yeah.
And
Scrum and.
Yeah. Scrum but. We don't do this.
Except.
And then you see the scaled agile framework for enterprise and the lean scaled agile framework for enterprise. And the lean one is like for small to medium enterprises. And it's like the London Underground tube map. It's just all these different things. And then when I'm sort of working on the new version of Fret Badger, which is going to look exactly the same as the old version. I'm also working on another thing. I just use a Kanban board. I have a backlog column and a ready to do column and a doing column and a done column when it's just me, because I consider the testing and everything part of that. But you
because
you
it
can
works.
put UAT and everything in there. The real issue that came along with Scrum was you have your backlog grooming sessions, which are like weekly, regardless of how many weeks you have in a sprint. Then you have your sprint planning session. And then you have your daily stand-ups, which everyone tries to keep to 15 minutes, but a lot of the time they run out, upwards of half an hour.
Right.
And then you have your retrospective and your sprint demo and your sprint review. And if you're doing 2-week sprints, you've got 10 days and you're spending like 20% of that in the various meetings, which means you're not building anything, you're not shipping anything, you're not delivering anything.
Right.
And where's the value? And if you are a small team of 6 or 8 developers and you are, if you're homogenous, if you all know the domain and all the different technologies and all this sort of thing, then anyone can take any ticket from the ready to do column and say, I'm doing this. And you can prioritize them just by moving them up and down. And you don't get into this thing of, story points and t-shirt sizes and all that stuff.
Right.
And it's just kind of, you don't have to do all that stuff. You can just put a board up and put some stories on it and move them across and just keep shipping and delivering.
One step up from a notepad.
Totally.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the Kanban board, and the first thing I thought is it's just a way to visualize where we're stuck.
That's right.
Yes.
That everybody can see, that you don't have to have a meeting. Nobody has to memorize. Like you see it every day.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
you see it when it unsticks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, people can kind of go, that was there yesterday. Why is it still there today?
Mm-hmm.
I'll go and ask him, rather than having a stand-up. The idea that you set aside 15 minutes in the morning, I think it appeals to developers because it's like, all right, so I have to talk to people for 15 minutes, but then I can spend the rest of the day
yay, I get
with
to
my
write
headphones on.
Gets you motivated to be alone.
So, yeah, again, it's that developer experience thing again. We don't like talking to each other, so just contain it to a thing.
Nice.
But no, you should be...
Get it out of the way, have a couple cups of coffee.
This whole show's just been about containers, right? It's just containers for social interaction. I get it.
Contain the complexity.
Right.
So, yeah. So, like I say, I'm going to be doing that talk. That's my sort of tech talk for the next year at least. I would like to shout out Alex Russell. I think Slightly Late is his sort of handle on various media and everything. So, and he worked on the Chrome browser for a long time, on the JavaScript runtime, V8, that sort of thing. And he is like the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dam, saying, please stop using all these JavaScript frameworks and everything. And so I was, some of the inspiration for the talk came from reading his blog posts as well. Yeah. So shout out to him.
That's great. Infrequently Noted is his blog.
There we go. That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll include it in the show notes. I've read it before. He is quite brilliant.
He is. He's a very, very smart guy, and we should listen to him.
Mm-hmm. Not wrong.
Yeah. So you got this talk. Where are you going to be delivering that in the upcoming months? So
next year, it's probably going to be at the NDC conferences, GoTo conferences, possibly DevOps. So DevOps have started asking me to come and do things now. Because I've been doing all these, how JavaScript happened and the Albatross project and Programming's Greatest Mistakes. So they're not tech specific. Yeah. And so I'm getting to go and do other conferences and meet entirely new audiences, which is wonderful. And I'm really enjoying it. And also my kids are at that age now where I can, do more traveling and speaking engagements. And I'm really looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah. There's a couple of conferences in Sweden, in Stockholm, that happen every year. DevSum and Sweetug. Yes, I will definitely try and get to DevSum. I've done that a couple of times. That's always a good conference. But yes, if anyone's listening to this and would like me to come to your massive conference with 3,000 attendees
But even if you would just like me to pop over and talk to a meetup or a user group or something,
right.
Then get in touch and we'll see what we can do.
Check out the Rendle Labs link is on the show notes. Just grab it.
Bus fare, a sandwich, and a hostel.
Yeah, that'll do me.
Or a couch.
Have base, will travel.
Yeah, there you go. Mark, it's always a pleasure talking to you. You always bring something interesting to the table, and this was no different. So thank you.
Thank you for having me on again. It's really great talking with you guys.
All right, and we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1. Recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time. Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a